Hello, and welcome to the third show of the Red-Pilled Fiction Factory. I hope you're enjoying these interviews, whose goal is to highlight and promote the largely ignored and unrewarded work of those of us who have combined an honest awareness of the current world situation with our own writing skills to create a genre I've called the red-pilled fiction, for want of a better term. If you do like the channel, please like and subscribe. We need some support. Now, while our previous writers were quite new to writing, they had full-time jobs and they'd just set about scribbling out a novel or two on the side, is already established as a writer and widely read. He's a scientist who, following in the footsteps of the likes of Carl Sagan, Poul Anderson, Lewis Carroll, and Sir Fred Hoyle, has also committed himself to writing fiction. In particular, he's known for his Hidden Truths trilogy, but he's also contributed to several anthologies and even a book on physics. He's a master of many trades. Amongst others, he's an inventor with more than 40 US patents to his name. He's a business entrepreneur as well. And his self-proclaimed interests include the study of antennas, microwaves, and electromagnetism, believe it or not. And his current job title, as far as I can ascertain, is Principal Scientist at a company called Geeks and Nerds Corporation. His name is Hans Schantz. Hi, Hans. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you and with your viewers.
Great pleasure. I'd like you to, I've introduced you somewhat, but I know mine is going to be a limited version. Could you just tell us a bit about your background, where you're how you got into writing, how you became red-pilled, perhaps?
Oh, certainly. Well, you know, I started off studying physics. I wanted to get into a little more practical perspective, though. So, you know, I settled on studying electromagnetics, theoretical electromagnetics, and you know, discovered that that was still practical enough. So I went back to grad school after getting my PhD and did some more work in electrical engineering before landing a job doing ultra-wideband antenna design. And that's where I got a big chunk of those patents that you mentioned, inventing various kinds of ultra-wideband antennas. And that led me to take the work I had done and integrate it with the broader body of work on ultra-wideband antennas and write my first book, which is The Art and Science of Ultra-Wideband Antennas.
What is ultra-wide? What is, in layman's terms, please, what practical uses do these things have? Is it computing? Is it communications?
Well, the ultra-wideband aspect of that refers to their frequency bandwidth. Most traditional radio systems are relatively narrow band. The whole concept behind how radio works, which goes, goodness, all the way back to an article that was written in 1892 by Sir William Crookes. Tesla was coming to town and about to present a lecture in London in, I think it was February of 1892. So the day before Tesla's lecture, I think he wanted to get his thoughts in place of how these newfangled electromagnetic disturbances that Hertz had discovered would work. And so he said and pointed out that from what they knew of physics back then in 1892, that it would be possible for two friends like you and me to convey messages back and forth using Morse code. Didn't quite have the video side of the communication figured out then, but that everyone would be able to use their own separate frequency channel. And that's really the heart of how the usage of the radio band has evolved since that point. The idea is you and I have our frequency bandwidth, another radio station has its allocated bandwidth, and we carve up the spectrum into these little tiny slivers where every person or every use has their right to that little tiny sliver. Well, ultrawideband radio was an attempt to look at that problem from a different, I guess you could call it orthogonal direction, where instead of looking at the spectrum divided up in frequency, you look at it divided up in time, and you try to send very short time duration impulse signals. Well, there's a fundamental rule of physics that I call Parseval's dilemma, that if you try to make a signal very short duration in time, it gets very broad in frequency. And conversely, if you want a signal that is very narrow in frequency, it's going to be a very long time duration signal.
Okay.
So it's a one or the other. You get to pick. So ultra wideband antennas are antennas that can handle very wide bands of frequency, maybe at least a 3-to-1 range of frequencies, and a lot of ultra wideband antennas will cover a whole decade of frequency, 10-to-1 frequency range or more. In fact, no, I don't have one handy on the desk behind me to show you. But that's the basic idea behind ultra wideband antennas. And the reason that I was very interested in that practical kind of electrical engineering is because the theory requires you to take a look at electromagnetics in particular, and I guess physics in general, on a time domain basis, to look at the time evolution of a physical system. You have, like with an impulse, you have a start to your impulse, and then your impulse is radiated, and then it ends. So you're looking at a specific process with a beginning and an end. The traditional way that most physicists and engineers look at how reality works is on a frequency domain basis. So they're looking at processes that are inherently continuous, that are averaged over time, and trying to draw conclusions about them based on the relative frequencies of them. And that works.
That can also apply to human endeavors as well, I imagine, to an extent, if you're using it in the loosest, which will tie in a little bit later. We'll come back to it, because the books address these issues, and I can see now where it all ties together, your position. I mean, an expert on antennas isn't normally first person you think of when it comes to writing stories about historical characters and the applications of inventions from centuries ago. But I can see now it's all tying together with cyclical.
Well, I hope that wasn't too much technical detail, and do feel free to cut me off if you think I'm going off into the weeds.
It's going to become relevant later, so it's good to ask. So where are you from? You're obviously North American. You're born in North America?
I was born in Michigan. Right. I grew up in Idaho. I guess it's a little town by most people's standards called Pocatello, but at the time I was there, it was the second largest in the state. So by local standards, it was the big city. I went to school for my undergrad degrees in industrial engineering and physics at Purdue University. I worked for a while in grad school at the Lawrence Livermore Lab in California. Grad school was at the University of Texas at Austin. I also worked for a while in Virginia as an undergrad.
Yeah. And the process of becoming red-pilled, were you born that way, or you had a revelatory moment like some people, or was it a gradual evolution? Or because you definitely fall into the red pill category. I've known you on the internet, at least, for quite a while, and I've followed a lot of you.
Well, I suppose I would have regarded myself as kind of a traditional libertarian or conservative side of the spectrum kind of guy. I really appreciated and still do Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. And when I set out to write The Hidden Truth, I thought, the real premise behind that is I've made some interesting connections in electromagnetics that I'm genuinely surprised weren't invented by the likes of Hertz and Heaviside over 100 years ago. They really should have gone down the road that I found, because it's the logical extension of everything they were working on. But somehow there was a discontinuity in the development of physics, and it swerved off to the left-hand branch. And as I've looked at it, I've realized there's a road to the right, if you will, that's lesser traveled. So one of the motivations behind my fiction was to explore the premise of, well, what if all of those 19th century scientists really did come up with all of those ideas that I've more recently discovered? And, well, why haven't we heard of them? And the fictional answer that I provide in my books is, well, there's an evil conspiracy. One of my heroes, before things get really serious, dubs them the Electromagnetic Villains International League, or EVIL for short. But the idea that there's some conspiracy that, oh yes, they knew this work was out there and they were suppressing it for their own sinister purposes. And that was really a fictional device. Of course, I realized that that could only be part of a much broader conspiracy or scheme. So in my first book, I set it up as an alternate history story where the point of divergence was 9/11. So in my story, and this isn't much of a spoiler because it's on the first page, we discover that on 9/11, the 9/11 hijackers ran their planes into the White House and the Capitol, killing a lot of prominent politicians, including President Gore. So now President Lieberman has formed a government of national unity with John McCain as his vice president, and that's the political structure of my book. And in that context, I assumed that, given the much greater severity of 9/11, there would be an even more obvious politicization of the internet and internet surveillance. I had all of the big tech companies nationalized as a company called Omnitia, so that I could describe their nefarious doings without having to ascribe them to real life, real world people. And it made for a good story in my first book. And then as I was writing the sequel to it, I began to realize, and I'm doing research, trying to work as much real life information as possible into my books, I realized all that stuff I'd made up fictionally more or less really did happen. I'd made up this fictional account of the internet conglomerate being funded by the CIA and under their control, and well, turns out that really did more or less happen. So as I started to write my second book and I started to research this, of course, I was still looking for some of the most outlandish speculations and theories and so forth to work into my fiction. But I realized a lot of them were disturbingly plausible. So I guess I came to the more red pill side of things through
your writing,
my fiction.
Oh, I see. That's fascinating. Wow, very interesting. Your hero is a young man, or your prime hero, the main hero. He's a schoolboy to start with, isn't he?
Yes. Yeah.
Does he evolve? I have read the first book. I haven't read the other two, but does he evolve? He grows through the trilogy, does he?
Yes, he does. In the first book, he begins to uncover the nature of the conspiracy, and decides to work toward the conspiracy's downfall. In the second book, he's off for his freshman year at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, and the partisans of Georgia Tech refer to themselves as Rambling Wrecks after the school fight song. So my second book is A Rambling Wreck. Right. And that describes his first year at Georgia Tech as he is uncovering more details about the history of the conspiracy and discovers that the conspiracy has sunk its tendrils into the campus and campus politics.
Every aspect.
And he and his friend decide that they will infiltrate the conspiracy. So they get to play this double game of pretending to be social justice warriors and political activists for the other side, while they're simultaneously busy trying to undermine it and figure out who's pulling the strings behind the scenes of the organization. Then the third novel, The Brave and the Bold, is set on Jekyll Island, Georgia. Now, Jekyll Island was historically...
Yes.
That was historically where the principals behind the Federal Reserve met to plot out the legislation that would create the Federal Reserve. It was a kind of millionaires, what would now these days be billionaires, exclusive resort where a lot of the principal bankers and industrialists of the period had their cottages that they would come and visit during the winter, or to go duck hunting or play golf or things like that. So in the third book, the hero infiltrates the meeting and tries to keep the evil conspirators from embroiling the country in an overseas war that would further their ends to the detriment of our country, kind of loosely based on the Iraq conflict. I'm currently writing the fourth book, and it's turning into a very long book.
Is it part of the trilogy, or is it an independent read, or is it loosely connected?
It will be. It's a continuation of the story. Each book is standalone and has a separate, call to action and plot and a resolution at the end. But then each one builds on the other, and the stakes are getting progressively larger as you go through the series. And I haven't really decided if I'm going to bring it all to a conclusion in one big book, or break out the action that is yet to come in maybe as many as 3 smaller books. So I'll have to figure that out. There is more to come, but there's certainly a good start to the series in the 3 volumes I've written so far.
It's how would you describe it? What category is the book, do you think? It's sort of science fiction, but it's set in the present day with...
It's set in, technically, I guess you would call it an alternate history story, because it's set in the time frame from about 2004 to 2006, but it's in a slightly different timeline than our own. One where 9/11 went down a little differently, and the politicization of big tech and is much more evident than it would have been, back then in our timeline. So it's kind of an alternate history story, but it's almost a current events alternate history story, because effectively I'm accelerating the kinds of things that have happened in our history over the last 15 years and compressing them into this fictional history. The whole radical political activism on campus. And in fact, it's kind of amusing that I'd already written my section about how my heroes are going to be involved in manipulating certain political contests in their home state of Georgia. Now I'm going to have to work a lot more real world details into that. Yeah, I wish I'd written a little faster. It would have been a lot more prescient, but
Yes,
I'll have the
indeed.
benefit of working with a lot more real life, real world material.
You will. Now, there are parallels with Tesla's story here. Surely, I'm not a geek and I'm not one of those that reads up on him all the time. But he obviously features in many internet sites and stuff. The theory being something similar happened to him, that he was either compromised or bought off or corrupted or somehow destroyed, and his discoveries and inventions have all been sidelined or maybe being used, but against us rather than in our benefit. That was, you don't mention him directly in the books themselves, but he's sort of a phantasm in the background, would you say, or story?
He is actually going to come into play in the universe as a whole, because I have an idea for kind of a prequel series set back in the 1890s, where Tesla will be a pivotal feature of that series. Now, coming back to the real world, of course, Tesla was responsible for the overall architecture of the alternating current electrical power distribution system that we use today.
Sure.
But after he accomplished that, he kind of went off on a tangent, trying to develop his own unique flavor of wireless power transfer and wireless signaling. And I think it turned out that the Hertzian electromagnetic wave approach that was championed by people like Oliver Lodge and Guglielmo Marconi ended up being easier to bring to fruition in terms of communicating and sending signals. But it's very interesting. Tesla's approach to global wireless power is actually being revived by some people in Texas who are looking to try to do long distance, high power power transfer in a way similar to what Tesla envisioned. So, it could well be that the ideas that Tesla was unable to bring to fruition may yet be revived and put to practical application.
I should have made clear that the book is aimed. Who are you writing for? I take it from my reading of it, a younger generation, but it's easily absorbed by adults too. There's no problem. But it's mainly aimed at the high school kid and university crowd, is it? Or
I kind of wrote a book that I would want to read. If you take a look at a survey of science fiction and action thrillers, a lot of it is written by people with a military background and tends to focus on threats and military action and violence, and there's suspense and things like that. But what I wanted to do was write something more along the lines of an intellectual and scientific thriller that was simplified enough that it could pass as a kind of young adult story and be accessible, even to, say, a high school student or a university student. So I was kind of aiming it to be on par with something like a Heinlein Juvenile, because I really enjoyed those. I still really enjoy a lot of those. They're among my favorite stories. Very clear, very simple, almost journalistic exposition with a hero trying to find his way in the world with the help of some adult mentorship who ultimately has to follow that Joseph Campbell hero's journey, find his own way, and confront the evil outside and the temptations inside to succumb to it and triumph.
These are themes and names that have already recurred in this it's only 3 shows we've done, but Heinlein and Ayn Rand keep popping up, that's for sure, and this idea of the hero, and I'm sure it will recur in further in every show we do. You've mentioned Heinlein, you mentioned Ayn Rand. They obviously were formative in your influencing your writing. Any other names that you think deserve attention?
Well, from a technical perspective, I really like Lester Dent. He is probably best known for his Doc Savage stories, but he was a master of pulp short stories, and he had a formula that is, that he would use to write mystery stories. Basically, it was almost cookie cutter. He was doing a 6,000 word story, and
probably writing once, 3 a week, and making $20 out of each one. So
yeah. So it was very cookie cutter. For the mystery, he wanted to have murder weapon, murderer, motive, setting. I forget. I think it was 4 or 5 things, and at least 2 or 3 of those had to be something strange or unusual or novel to make it an interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the first quarter of the story introduces the, hero and the setting like you normally would. And somewhere around the 1/4 point, bang, things get worse. It's way worse than the hero expected. Or, all of a sudden we discover that there are levels and levels beyond that, the original expectation. There's a big shift there. Then you have another quarter of the story, and at the halfway point, then things get really serious, and there's another twist or a surprise. The person we were thinking was the murderer isn't, so somehow the plot has to take a twist. And then at the end of the final 3 quarters, we get the triumph of okay, maybe we figured it out, but it's a race to the conclusion to try to catch the guy before he ends up killing someone else, or there's some kind of yet again another dramatic escalation. And really, that's a cookie cutter formula. But the lesson I took from that is to mix it up and don't go more than about 1,500 words in your story without introducing some kind of a resolution of a conflict, a twist, a new conflict popping up. But there has to be some kind of a clever twist in the story where we've been going along a certain track and all of a sudden we jump and go somewhere else.
I haven't heard of Lester Dent. I will have to look him up. Is there a particular anthology or something that you recommend? I presume these are all quite short stories.
I've read a couple. His stories have been included in a couple of anthologies. Really, the short, and I couldn't think of one off the top of my head. The short story writer, though, that I really like is Frederick Brown. He wrote science fiction and mystery, was very active in the 50s. Some of his best known novels are The Fabulous Clip Joint, which was set in Chicago of the 1950s, Screaming Mimi. I really liked The Deep End. I think that's probably his, The Lenient Beast is my favorite one of his novels. But anyway,
okay.
He had a way of throwing in some really ingenious surprises in a short story where, he'd do the entire short story, it'd be engaging, it'd be exciting, then all of a sudden in the final handful of sentences, all of your expectations are blown. You discover it's all about something else, and it's even more satisfying because of that. So, when I've tried to do short stories, I try to emulate that style of writing.
Very good. I'm learning something. I've read widely, but these are new names to me, and I'll have to look them up. I love the 50s pulp stuff, though. It's just they don't get much attention anymore, so it's difficult to know where to start.
Well,
I
was going to say, it's amazing how many great contemporary writers there are. I mean, I have been overwhelmed. 10 years ago, my problem was I didn't have enough books to read, and I'd reread my old favorites over and over and over again. Now, with my connections to indie writing circles, there's so much good stuff out there. I cannot keep up with it. And my backlog of books to read is growing faster than I've been able to read them. One author who was a very big influence on me, although I guess more from an anti-influence than anything else, is John C. Wright. He is a grandmaster science fiction writer and one of the most ingenious, creative science fiction writers that I've read. But he has the most elaborate and descriptive descriptions of plots and scenes and settings that I've ever seen, that are just ingenious and beautifully crafted. Every description is like a work of art. And reading him, I frankly felt so intimidated that that's part of why my personal style is to be strictly very journalistic and streamlined, and not to put in any extraneous difficulty or any extraneous detail, just because I've seen how someone much better than I am at doing it succeeds.
I think we all have we all have ghosts like that haunt us when we're writing, and we wish we could do half as good as they do.
Yeah.
And they seem to do it naturally without trying as well. John C. Wright rings a bell. Is he the guy that Vox Day, the blogger, is crazy about as well? Do you know?
I think I've read some positive commentary, and John C. Wright was published in the Castalia House publishing company that Vox Day runs. But I think more recently he's moved over to Silver Empire Publishing, and they're actually my publisher now too. Oh. They've picked up a lot of really good red pill, and I think they're aiming to be a big player in what they're calling Catholic action thriller fiction.
Fantastic. Maybe you could put in a good word for this channel, and maybe they've got some other writers along the line. We could do some talks with a stable of writers. Several themes recur in your works. The reason I know you from the past is there was a Facebook group called the RK Selection Theory discussion group, which has now been nuked by the gods at Facebook headquarters, sadly, a few weeks ago only. But it was a very vibrant and worthwhile group with about 1,500 members, which we were both a part. Obviously, I know a bit about RK Selection. Would you like to give your interpretation of it, and also address how it integrates into your books?
Oh, sure. Well, a part of my what I'm doing in my books is crafting an elaborate secret history of the events that have taken place centuries in the past. And I've always had a fascination with history and how it works, from Asimov's Foundation series, and the notion of actually being able to predict what's going to happen in the broader currents of history, and understand what are the principles that govern how history works. And that's what really brought me to an interest in RK theory. Mathematically, if you look at the population equation for a population of organisms living in a particular environment, if you introduce them to this environment, their population grows exponentially according to this exponential constant that is related to the lowercase r in the formula. And but ultimately it will reach some kind of a cap. There's some limit to
the limits,
there's a limit to the resources there. Population cannot increase exponentially without bound. You end up in your Malthusian catastrophe where there's not going to be enough food or resources for people, and that's governed by a parameter capital K in that mathematical formula. And that really gives a good first order view of how populations work. When resources are free and easy, they'll tend to grow exponentially. As you start bumping up against those inherent limits, then life gets harder. You have to work and compete against other people in order to make your living and be successful. And that really gives rise to two different philosophies of behavior and of life. The R selected that is quick to exploit free resources and spiral off into exponential growth, and a K selected where you're used to dealing with limited resources and with competition, and conflict is the air you breathe and the water you drink from that perspective. And you're used to having to earn a living instead of having it handed to you. And a gentleman who goes by the moniker of Anonymous Conservative wrote a very clever book taking that concept and arguing that it provides a basis for the evolutionary development of political philosophies. That people are not can go either way on that spectrum, R or K. There may be things linked to genetics and heritage, why you might be one way or the other, but people are very adaptable and can adapt one strategy or the other. And he explains our contemporary political scene from that perspective, which is very insightful, because it tends to explain why a whole bunch of seemingly disconnected political positions tend to cluster together.
Or even non-political positions. That's the amazing thing that struck me with the theory. It can account for all sorts of behavioral patterns, or political or otherwise, that whether someone wears an earring through their nose or paints a head blue can be explained. The nice summary, the easiest summary, is the old meme that's very famous now about hard times making, or hard men making good times, and the cycle goes through to good times making soft men. But it is a cycle, it does recur. The term RK is difficult for a lot of people because it suggests some kind of formula and science and maths and all sorts, but it's a very simple concept to grasp. And I do recommend anyone who's out there, who's in the red-pilled half of the population, to explore it, because it can certainly, it's like Drano for the brain in a way. It just clarifies a lot of issues very clearly and conclusively, without the need really for any debate, or I mean, it's just explaining what nature does and how it works, and how that is reflected ultimately in the way we behave. So yeah, okay.
Well, and it's fascinating. As I got into that, there are any number of very clever people who've come up with theoretical bases for understanding and analyzing history and how it works in terms of those kinds of evolutionary psychology perspectives, like Anonymous Conservative did. I've really enjoyed reading about biohistory, something that Jim Penman
yes, in Australia, I think.
Yes, exactly. He's got a number of introductory videos that explain that, how the pressures of social development lead to civilization. But to put it in simple terms, it goes back to what you were talking about, that hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times, and the cycle repeats itself.
And what other themes do you address, the main themes that you address in the books?
Well, in addition to that, scientific and political background, it's really a coming of age story, in the sense of a young man having to figure out his way in life and having to face an unimaginably dangerous and powerful conspiracy and try to defeat it. But it's also, I guess you could call it in a way my complement to or answer to Ayn Rand, because Ayn Rand's books are all about the rugged individualist hero, whether it's the Howard Rourke defying all the odds to build the buildings he wants to build, or the heroes of Atlas Shrugged who shrug off the shackles of the tyrants who want to oppress them and go their own way and let society collapse in their wake. But the one thing I found really lacking in Ayn Rand's fiction is she never really addressed social questions. It was all focused on the individual and individuals interacting with other individuals. I mean, if you take a look at her objectivist utopia of Galt's Gulch, for instance, just about 2/3 of the way into the book, the heroine manages to stumble across this hideaway where all of the missing heroes, industrialists and bankers and titans of industry have hidden themselves away, and she gets to take a tour, and Ayn Rand walks us through this area, and we have the titan of industry who's the grocer, and the one who's now the farmer, and the one who's now the mechanic in this little community, and and then there's the one of the very few women there who's the mother, and she's got 3 or 4 children. And when I read that, holy demographic crisis. This is not a basis for a sustainable society if you don't nurture and encourage and have families and people raising children and raising up the next generation. And that's
sorry to interrupt, but it's easy to explain when you look at Ayn Rand herself. She was I think she married eventually, but she was childless, wasn't she? I think, and her life was very driven by things that were not of the familial nature. So yes, you can see where it comes from. But yes, it is. It's a terrible weakness, and I'm glad someone's picking up on it. Go on.
Well, so Ayn Rand, of course, grew up in Russia under the shadow of the Bolshevik Revolution. From reading her biographies, I understand she did have a close relationship with her father. She was a lot more distant from her mother, but never really had close personal familial ties. I mean, she left at a relatively young age. I think she was 20 when she went off on her own to make her own life in America, and she really lived that Howard Rourke-like story on her own, and that's what she knew and that's what she wrote about, and just never the whole family side of things, and how a group of people working together with effective leadership can synergistically accomplish more than any one individual of them could alone. That sort of escapes her. I mean, if I were writing Atlas Shrugged, I'd have had, Eddie Willers, who is her, everyman character, who works with the railroad titan of industry, Dagny Taggart. I'd have had him actually be able to contribute ideas. Gee, when I was working on the line, we did this. Maybe this idea will work in this context, and bring some unique experience that then helps Dagny do the job. But the way Ayn Rand always writes it is all of the good ideas come from the top and they trickle down, and the people on the bottom are the ones who just implement them and don't contribute to that success in any way by providing contributing their own small individual spark of greatness and creativity to the overall scheme. So what I was trying to do, and what I think I've accomplished in my stories, is show how my hero is a teenage high school student, and he is trying to take on the biggest, most dangerous, most powerful villains in the world today. And it's simply not realistic that he could do that by himself. So in the first book, he is working with his family members, with his friends, with some other people he meets, building kind of a loose alliance to work toward this end. As the stories go further on, it gets more elaborate, and there's more of a cell structure and more of a fourth generation warfare kind of perspective, in which you have him working loosely with a number of other independent agents and actually other bands of conspirators who are also working, sharing some parallel aims. In book 2, for instance, I introduce a secret Catholic order that acts to try to preserve knowledge and protect scientists behind the scenes, that is also fighting for the downfall of the evil conspiracy. And I have a Chinese Tong that used to be servants of the conspiracy but broke away from it and is now fighting the conspiracy. So I work in all of these different strands of multiple conspirators who the hero is, allying with to pursue joint projects against their common enemy. And I think that makes for a much more realistic story of how one person can affect change than just assuming that it's all going to come from, the one hero who's going to do everything himself.
And your heroes tend to be everyman in the sense that they're fairly run-of-the-mill. They're not special. Most of them, from what I'm taking, are not specially trained in the skills of assassination and warfare or anything. They are, and that's an Ayn Randian trait as well. She's taken people that you could meet in daily life and exaggerated their abilities, but they're very much normal people. You made a point of that, it seems, almost.
Well, I tried. Of course, The Hidden Truth was my first novel, and I did some things in it that I probably wouldn't do now that I am more experienced, that were kind of gimmicky now that I look back at it. But, for instance, I've never really described my hero or what he looks like or any details of his appearance. And I did that very deliberately because it doesn't matter to the story. And I would just as soon have whoever is reading it come up with their own mind's eye view of what the hero must be like that they're comfortable with. And that's fine. It doesn't make a difference to the story to do it that way. And I didn't even, I wrote it from a first person perspective. So you're getting to see what the hero is thinking and how he's processing the data and how he's making his decisions, because I think that ends up being a little more interesting and makes it a lot easier to convey things like the psychological motivations and understand what's going on, at least for the hero. And I didn't even introduce the name of the hero until the very last page of the book. So I kind of cleverly dodged having his name get mentioned throughout the entire book, which got a little bit challenging.
I can imagine, yeah.
The idea kind of being, the old tradition of not, the young man not actually earning his adult name until he passes the tradition into adulthood through the trial, the tribulation, the ritual of, going out, in the winter like the Spartan youths with his spear to face the wolf alone or something like that. So that was the kind of thing I had in mind, that by the end of the first book, my hero has faced his first conflict and been hardened by it and inspired by it and is now ready to assume his adult name and go out into the world and take on the conspiracy.
Yes. So you say that there's a last book in the planning stages, or you've started writing it?
Yes. The last book, I'm rethinking my plans. I'm actually working right now. My primary project is a nonfiction book on my ideas about electromagnetics, because I got kind of tired of just teasing them in the fiction, and thought it would be handy to just write a nonfiction book where I explain, what's going on in electromagnetics and how electromagnetics works, and integrate that with a history of electromagnetics. So that's my primary project. But on the side, when I've been taking a break from that project, I've been working on the final book, which is going to be a hell of an engineer. And I'm about a quarter of the way through it, and I can see already it's going to be much longer than even book 3 was. So I'm considering maybe breaking it up into some shorter books, so I can get the first piece out faster, instead of forcing all my readers to wait another year or two for the big, massive tome.
How long does it take you to write how long did the previous books take, more or less?
Normally, when I'm writing in my spare time and I'm writing fiction, I've been able to crank out, 10,000 words or so a month, maybe a little better than that. So I write about a novel a year. And I think even someone working part-time as a writer like me ought to be able to handle that kind of a pace.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, the nonfiction is a lot harder to write. In fact, I turned to fiction, after finishing the second edition of my Art and Science of Ultrawideband Antennas book, because I was just tired of writing that involved having to do figures and references and equations and so forth. And I'm being reminded of why I made that decision now that I'm writing nonfiction again, because although I don't really have equations in it, it is a book with an awful lot of references. I think I'm well over 500 endnotes in the book and counting, just from citing literature and things I'm quoting. Yes. And then, of course, trying to fit figures in. I don't like technical books that are a wall of text. And I try to put at least a figure every other page or so that you can kind of see visually what's going on in the story and break it up. That's just part of writing a good nonfiction book. I
don't envy you. I'm going to stick to fiction, because painful as it is to write fiction, and it is an ordeal, definitely, it sounds quite pleasant compared to nonfiction on antennas. Have you got any, in closing, advice for upcoming writers? There aren't many in our part of the spectrum, and not of those that there are very few who have sold lots of books like yourself. I can think of only about a handful. Any advice, either from a red-pilled perspective? I know you've written up in your blog, because you do have a blog, and you've sometimes put writing advice in that. Is there anything you'd suggest to those who are going to try their hand and maybe watching this, trying to learn something?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of great references and resources out there. The Mad Genius blog that Sarah Hoyt and Peter Grant and Cedar Sanderson and a host of other kind of conservative and libertarian writers maintain has a lot of great articles on the nuts and bolts of writing and how to get published, and things like how to find a copy editor and how to find a cover artist and how to get your book up on Amazon. But it's really so easy these days to get a book out there that really you should focus on writing a story and honing it and practicing your art. The first pancake out of the pan is liable to be burned or lopsided or not cooked just right. But the more you write, the better you will get. Find books you like to read and emulate them. Try to master their tips and tricks. there are any number of people who will give you cookie cutter recipes that will let you write good books. There's the archetype of the hero's journey that a lot of authors read, and you can fit a lot of stories into that kind of template. Blake Snyder's Save the Cat is actually about script writing more than about novel writing, but his notion of having story beats corresponds very closely to what you'd want to do in a novel. And there's nothing wrong with following a formula like that, even though it's kind of cookie cutter, because it'll at least be good, cookie cutter, compared to just randomly doing something. Now, of course, our mutual friend Neil Victorian, kind of blew that out the window with his debut novel that's temporally discontinuous, which was a clever thing to do, but man, I'd hate to try to pull that off myself. That's a high wire act, and he accomplishes it very well. I don't know that I could do that, but there's lots of resources out there that can help you, and lots of fellow writers in different groups who will happily share the benefits of their wisdom and provide encouragement. So if you're interested in writing, give it a try. It's a fun hobby, but it's very hard to do it and replace your day job.
It certainly is. It's very hard, full stop, and to make money out of it is doubly hard. But we do need more people from our side of the fence throwing themselves into it one way or the other and giving it their best shot, because as Breitbart said, politics is downstream of culture, and frankly, the culture at the moment could do with some improvement. And any contributions would be gratefully received. They don't even have to be that good at this stage, I don't think. Just everybody's contribution will be good. Mm-hmm. Very well, Hans. I think that brings us to the end of the interview. I greatly appreciate you coming on.
Sure.
And we wish you a lot of luck in the next, whether it's the fiction or the non-fiction, but we wish you luck with that. And,
thank you very much.
Maybe reviewing it later on when you're ready for that, when you're ready with it.
Great. I'll be in touch.
Very good, Hans. It's great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All the best.
Thank you. Goodbye.